Oh, this is the big transfer of the summer. Welcome back to the Lawrence McKenna channel, guys. It's good to have you. If you've not already hit subscribe, hit it down there. We're going to be looking at Declan Rice today. You don't have to hit subscribe yet. Hit it at the end of the video if you want to. But we're going to go through everything that Declan Rice brings to Arsenal. There's the mind map. We've listened, we've read, we've watched as many videos as we can about the guy, and obviously we've been watching him throughout the season for West Ham. Zoom in. Declan Rice was not only linked with people like Arsenal, although weirdly for a long time he wasn't really linked with Arsenal at all. It was actually Chelsea he was heavily linked with. Apparently there were a lot of close friends that said he would have loved to have gone to Chelsea, being a bit of a Chelsea lad, growing up in an area with a couple of other Chelsea players, and overall just being a London guy who, you know, probably doesn't differentiate between the areas because he is a player. He just wanted to be picked up by a club. Declan Rice wanted to go to Chelsea at one point. And at one point, Chelsea were reaching out to a lot of people. In fact, they were reaching out to a lot of people in the same way as some other clubs have been more recently. They reached out to Jude Bellingham. Apparently, they got a soft yes from Jude Bellingham, in the same way that Man City got a soft yes from Jude Bellingham, in the same way that Liverpool got a soft yes from Jude Bellingham, in the same way that Real Madrid got a soft yes from Jude Bellingham. But at this point now, that transfer has been concluded for 100 million euros rising. It looks as if the next big piece of transfer news this summer is Declan Rice. And in fact, he might even be, I don't want to say the more suited to the Premier League, because I think Jude Bellingham would have obviously been an incredible transfer. But obviously he's a proven prospect in the Premier League, and that is a big thing for us. He was also at one point heavily linked with Manchester United. A lot of my friends around the club of Manchester United saying, hey, I think he's pretty much nailed on to come here. They thought he could completely revolutionise their midfield. They thought a signing of him, along with an incredible striker to finish things off, could have been a tilt for Manchester United, and I'm kind of inclined to agree. But now, what we're looking at, I'm just giving you a bit of context there, by the way, guys, is a guy who's just won the Europa Conference League, a guy who's just had a historic season with West Ham in terms of this cup here, but a terrible season in terms of the trajectory of West Ham, a terrible season in terms of what they actually achieved in the Premier League, and probably is looking to move on at this point because he's given everything he can to the club. He had the high point where they got in to the Europa Conference League, which possibly could have been better, but was a good stepping stone, and now they need to reinvest. So at this point, this picture might be the last that you see of Declan Rice in a West Ham shirt. Of course, it is a massive summer for Arsenal. Mikel Arteta has been plotting for a while, and weirdly, I feel like the narrative has changed around Arsenal, though the narrative around Mikel Arteta, which is massively improved considering where we saw him last season in terms of the public eye, in terms of people who rated him and all these kind of things, has also changed. The strange thing about that is the expectation that has come with that has not necessarily shifted in the way that I would have expected it to. And yes, it's a massive summer, not only because they need to continue the plan that they originally laid out, which I believe they're still sticking to, but also because they have to basically wrangle and wrestle with the fact that they were competing for a Premier League title at one point this season. Maybe, even though they were ahead of time, they need to reconcile with the idea that they've sort of put some cards on the table at this point, and they can no longer kind of go under the radar in terms of transfers, but also just in terms of the way they're playing. And that kind of played out at the end of last season. They'll be an incredible prospect, like I've laid out here, in 4 competitions next season. So not only do they need to add more bodies to the squad, they also need to add more depth at a time when they are losing some players that were so key in that initial title tilt. Not least Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka. Xhaka already moving on, of course, this summer, and credit to him. He wanted more playing time, so he had to go to another league. It's probably a step across rather than a step down and going to the Bundesliga, but at the same time, I think he realised you can also outstay your welcome. And it goes back to the old Batman line of you either die a superhero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Not that he was a superhero, though he did massively revive the image of Granit Xhaka at one point, but it was partly as that midfield unit alongside Thomas Partey, who may also in the near future be needing to revive a bit of his image, shall we say. Now, those two have been fantastic, and I think that they put in an incredible shift for Arsenal. But if Arsenal really want to move forward, they need to make some cutthroat decisions this summer, some decisions that might be difficult, but at the same time, they become a lot less difficult when you are bringing in some of the quality of Declan Rice. Look what I've laid out here. I've laid out, similar to what I've looked at before, but Declan Rice is a player that covers a lot of the field for West Ham, right? And West Ham are predominantly a team that are on the back foot. If you look at this, right, this is their Europa Conference League final against Fiorentina. They played a majority of that on the back foot, needing players that could influence where Fiorentina went, where the ball was going to be, and basically, that's exactly what Declan Rice is good at. He's got great anticipation skills, he's got incredible vision of the game, and he knows how to defend and how to marshal a side to get the right shape to defend against a side that are basically in the ascendancy. I'll get on to why that's important in a second, but I'll show you this as well, right? So that was the Fiorentina graphic right there, right? That's his heat map for that game. Nowhere particularly intensely red, right? But at the same time, they had lower expected goals than West Ham, which is wild if you think about it. They also dominated possession. It was almost 30% possession for West Ham in that final. That's insane if you think about it in a final. West Ham played that one almost perfectly. And it's people like Declan Rice that will have massively allowed them to do that. Look at this as well against Manchester United. His average position a little bit further up, but what he's doing is he's playing as part of a double pivot here with Thomas Souček. He's playing as a supporting player for all of the attackers, so all those guys kind of play off his movement forward. So you've got Antonio basically looking, always a siren, Mikel Antonio looking for some moves off him. You've got Jared Bowen also looking for a move off him. You've got whoever is also in that attacking shape also looking for moves off of him. That's probably going to change when he goes to a bigger club. Just a little, but it will change. This is him versus AZ Alkmaar. I don't know if it's first leg or second leg, but look at the... Oh, it is second leg, sorry, because they're away. First leg, sorry. No, second, yeah. Anyway, the much more intensity in terms of heat map here as well. Look at the areas that he's covering. He's covering a massive part of that left side. It's not just part of a double pivot. It's him supporting the left wing out there and also supporting his fullback where he would have needed to have filled in. Huge amount of space behind him there. That shows intelligence, but also the need for what basically Arsenal have a need for now, especially if you look at Granit Xhaka's heat map in just a second. Now, this was actually a game that West Ham lost, but a lot of people thought that West Ham had a chance against the likes of Liverpool. He's not, again, playing as part of a traditional double pivot because there is it is a double pivot, but traditionally, obviously, those two maybe be a little bit more close to each other. But what they did was it spread out the power on the field of West Ham, gave Declan Rice a lot more opportunities to step into the play. And what they'd do is they'd basically try and stifle Liverpool's right-hand side, which they did particularly well in that game, actually. Declan Rice was a huge part of that, and you can see the targeted Trent Alexander-Arnold's side as well. So again, a bit of a shift in terms of what Declan Rice would have done in that game, but something that's quite key. And then finally, I want to talk about Newcastle. Newcastle were a tricky, formidable opponent last year. I don't actually think it was a particularly fantastic game for West Ham. In fact, West Ham struggled against a lot of the big sides, struggling against a lot of sides in the Premier League last year, but huge, should we say, positives were Declan Rice's performance. Declan Rice here, his average position is there, but look at where the heat map is. Huge amount of support for the fullback and the left winger, but also a huge amount of support for, well, he didn't have Souček in this game for the sub appearance, but see what I mean? There's a bit more movement in terms of where it is that he's defending, where it is that he's playing. This is going to be key in a second, and I'll point out why, right? Look at the relationship. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. Look at the relationship between him and Souček. That's his season heat map. Much more central than you would have thought looking at those other heat maps, right? But look at the support for the fullback up here. Look at the defensive action here at the back and the distribution that you will have had. I've not got a pass map, but if you were to look at the pass map, then you would see there's a lot of short passes mixed with a lot of long passes as well. All the things that I was valuing in Jude Bellingham, we must also value in Rice. He's great at picking up the ball and transitioning it very quickly. Who else wants to do that? That's right, Arsenal. And Souček, he was also a player that was all over the place, but obviously he's a lot more right-hand side predominantly for West Ham. You can see in really intense areas of play there, and obviously there's bits of cover there, and obviously back in the penalty area. They needed those guys to be running that midfield, and Arsenal need a guy who's going to be able to marshal and general that midfield in himself as well. How does that relate to where Arsenal played last season? Well, I've mapped out 4 of the Arsenal midfielders, including Ødegaard, right? So first of all, this is Partey. Really intense levels of involvement, obviously at the defensive end, as almost, you could see that as part of a double pivot right there, but also them getting involved in build-up play. Not only getting involved in build-up play, but controlling build-up play. Arsenal were a side that very front foot last season, which got a lot of people on the back foot initially because they weren't expecting that. Arsenal were a lot more submissive before, then they became a lot more dominant, a huge part of why people find it hard or found it hard to play them initially. And a huge part of that was also Granit Xhaka's control as well. Not many people saw how good Granit Xhaka was going to be. This is going to be an area that Arsenal are going to miss people in next season, and that is where Declan Rice can step in and play a big role as well, right? Not only maybe part of a double pivot with someone like Partey, but also possibly on his own as well. And you can see where he would also be able to enable people like Odegaard as well. Odegaard coming back a lot, receiving the ball and having to move it and transition it forward. If you have a midfield with Declan Rice in, does Odegaard need to come back as much? Would we see more goals from Odegaard if he is closer to goal? You saw later on in the season when Arsenal really needed to press on the subject of scoring a goal, Odegaard got pushed forward a lot more, and obviously it made him a bit more open at the back. They need people who are good at shepherding, good at moving the opposition around. And then finally, this is the heat map for Jorginho. Obviously, he's all over the place, but there's a lot of involvement here. They need someone who's pushing down the field and getting involved in passes. This is Jorginho when clearing a lot of the corners and things like that, and initially getting on the ball. That's going to be somewhere that Declan Rice can get involved. You can move that about 10 feet further forward. That's Declan Rice. There's Declan Rice's office. What a lovely little office you got there, Dec. And that is why possession is so key to them, right? And at the same time, I think it's worth us talking about Declan Rice's influence on a game. And I'm going to compare him with his midfield compatriot in Bellingham. Bellingham's just gone for 100 mil, if not more, right? And over the lifetime of his contract, sure, at Real Madrid, he's going to earn more money. That's purely just because he is Jude Bellingham. He's a hugely marketable asset. And part of the reason that Jude Bellingham is so marketable is A, he was at Borussia Dortmund, B, he was at a club where basically they allowed him to play some of his better football and also at a higher level than he was at West Ham. But also, he's basically someone who passes an eye test. Declan Rice completely passes the eye test. But what is weird about a player like Declan Rice is you very often won't get the influence of it. It's very hard to map a Declan Rice shadow over a player, right? There are a couple of players in the Premier League last season, particularly again, that's why I went into that Liverpool game back here, where you look at his average position. That's on the ball. Off the ball is going to have been key, and I would love to have seen that. And that's where, I know some people out there are probably going to raise an eyebrow here. It's the shepherding of the ball that I really appreciated from someone like Xabi Alonso at Barcelona, at Real Madrid, at Liverpool, at Bayern Munich. All those teams appreciated his influence on the game. Pep Guardiola appreciated his influence on the game. And so Mikel Arteta will also appreciate his influence on the game. I'm not saying it's about passing range for someone like Declan Rice. It's about him having that influence on the midfield. Arsenal are an incredibly front foot side. They're a side that love to be in the ascendancy. They're a side that love to basically know that they are controlling a match. And when control begins to slip away from them, as we saw last season, there are times where you see them not give up on a game, but find it hard to get back into it. Being on the back foot, which is something that they're going to have to get used to because there's going to be a lot more dominant sides in the league and gives them a bit more flexibility, is going to be key to moving forward for Mikel Arteta. They need more even games. I was at Anfield, as I've kept telling you guys, time after time in that game, we're in the 2-2, they kept doing things that you just thought, why aren't you attacking us in our weak areas? Declan Rice is incredibly good at running into weak areas, running through a midfield. He's incredibly good at breaking up play and knowing when to step in. Another siren. And he's also incredibly good at then distributing the ball where it needs to go. Someone gets to him and he releases. Someone gets to him and he releases. There's always a time where you can see Jeroboam running off him, where you can see someone like Antonio running off. There's a lot of important aspects to that, and all that grants you is control. Now, a lot of you might be saying, hey, it's not just Declan Rice that's going to allow you control. It's also someone like Moise Caicedo, right? Another fantastic player, Rice and Caicedo. But that is 150, if not almost 200 million pound midfield. I'm not doubting that Arsenal won't be able to spend that kind of money, but I think people like West Ham and Brighton are going to make it difficult for someone like Arsenal or any side of Arsenal's level to spend 200 million in one summer. Not without some staggered payments. That's partially what people have said was a bit of a stumbling block between Arsenal and West Ham, was West Ham wanting just 2 payment blocks. A lot of other sides, including Real Madrid, when they went for Jude Bellingham, have staggered a lot of the payments. And so, obviously there's a long-term repayment plan. All these people are basically just banks for each other, and these guys are just assets that they trade. So, that's obviously not the case. Obviously they're humans, but you get what I'm saying. Like, to a lot of these people, it's about moving assets, right? So with that, a Moise Caicedo midfield would obviously be incredible. You have to make some difficult decisions. This is someone like, I'm just talking about people like Lokonga, like if we go back to Thomas Partey. Some people are talking about making a stupid decision of Martin Odegaard. Martin Odegaard is captain of the club. Arteta wouldn't have made him captain of the club if he wasn't doing something in the long term with him. And frankly, I think there's going to be more people locked down to contracts very soon. Anyway, you want Saka for the long term. People were quite weirdly critical of the contract length on that, but he's an Arsenal player, and if you continue to be successful, he will stay. Frankly, players who want out leave. Contracts are almost irrelevant. Just getting them on a contract, making sure they're happy is the more important aspect than locking them down to something long-term, i.e. Mason Mount, right? He basically wants higher amounts of wages because he is very important. He wants to match someone like I think he wants to match someone along the lines of basically anyone who's one of the top paid people at that club. So Reece James or someone like that. What I'm saying is, they're going to have a lot of big contracts and changes this summer at Arsenal. So lean into that, right? Look at your long term. Is it better to sign Thomas Partey, an aging player towards the end of the highlight of his career, or is it better to sign two young players and move on Thomas Partey, get a bit of return for him this summer in the same way as you didn't for Granit Xhaka, get a bit of return for a couple of people, and work out where your team goes from here? There's an incredible amount of how can I put it? I guess there's an incredible amount of affection for a lot of these Arsenal players because what they push for this season. But if you're not cutthroat enough, it's going to get difficult next year. And that's partially where I bring you into what's actually going to happen here. I'm going to ask a critical question here. Who is Rice replacing in that midfield? What is the key aspect of this midfield that you need to appreciate in order to get the best out of Declan Rice? I've laid it out here. This was kind of how they played last year. Though Zinchenko was obviously tucked inside, and then you got Gabriel and Saliba, and then White was progressed but would sometimes come back. Obviously, he's a transition centre-back. So you've then got kind of these two at the centre of the midfield, making that box, like people really appreciated. Obviously, Rice can be replaced with Granit Xhaka there. But Rice, could he be further forward? Could he be part of a more controlling formation? Could also then you see, or this, Rice goes a bit deeper, and you see people pushing forward like Partey, or I mean Partey probably not, because I imagine you move Partey on, but Odegaard becomes a little bit more critical in that midfield. Jorginho becomes a little bit critical, pushing Saka a little bit further forward, pushing Martinelli a little bit further forward, and allowing other midfielders in what was more like a 2-2-6, that does add up, last year than anything else. Zinchenko is probably the player, White probably there. The control, when Arsenal have control over that, right, is key. Arsenal suffered last year, by the way, for counter-attacks when they didn't have their combination of Gabriel and Saliba. I can't blame Holding for, the quality of player that he is. I think he was a great understudy, but obviously we know why Arsenal slipped up sort of later on, or things began to fall away. A, there was a lot of pressure on them, but B, they missed the centre-back pairing that they had. Not just one centre-back, a centre-back pairing. They would have needed a midfielder, and I get that Partey was probably a very good element of that, but fitness-wise, he could have been a little bit better, along with a couple of other players in the squad as well. Look at that. Rice would be able to read the game. Rice would be able to distribute, be able to transition. You can see him switching out with someone, allows them a bit more tactical flexibility there. And you've got someone like Thomas Partey able to sit. You could have Caicedo in there as well. I've also put Jorginho there. I should probably... That was the Partey alarm, by the way. It's Partey time. The point is, Declan Rice could play either there or there, and at this point I'm kind of wondering whether he is a replacement for a mixture of Granit Xhaka and Partey. If you could have had a player, and get that the midfield's very much about bodies, you always need at least two people in that midfield. You're going to need a partner in there. I know it preferably would be Caicedo, but spending money on both of them, that's a huge challenge here for Arsenal. That is like a really big challenge for this side in terms of finance, right? But maybe it's possible. And if a player really wants to go there, thinks it's possible, then sure. The real issue, I think, for Arsenal will be, and I've not really finished with that, but they need another striker outside of Jesus. I obviously love the backups that they've had this year, but again, some difficult decisions to be made for Arsenal moving forward. Part of the reason being, Jesus is a fantastic player, Can they get more goals out of someone else next season? Could he be a rotating player? They seem to be looking at someone like a Martinelli and what it is that he offers. And this is where I get into my final little bit now. I didn't really put him in the previous graphics, but Odegaard will always stay. What if we were to switch this Partey here for Kai Havertz? Now imagine this is Kai Havertz. That's Martin Odegaard. That's Zinchenko and Rice at the base of that midfield. And that's White there. Basically, is a right midfielder, but as a right wing-back predominantly, right? Kai Havertz plays perfectly in this position. Odegaard plays almost perfectly in this position. Kai Havertz is a much bigger goal threat than someone like Gabriel Jesus, well, alongside someone like Gabriel Jesus and Martinelli. He's got great combination play, and arguably, obviously, because he hasn't been paired up with great partners at Chelsea in a formation that suits him, I'm just saying, it'd just be interesting to see what could be possible there. Maybe it won't happen, but if it isn't Kai Havertz, it could be someone else who's good. Basically, I'm saying Rice could come in for Partey, and then the replacement for someone like Xhaka, who arguably played in a similar position to someone like Kai Havertz, especially if we go back to there. He's probably a little bit deeper than Kai Havertz, but look at where he is. Look at where he's operating. That's a half space there. Put Zinchenko there. Do you get what I'm saying? Do you get what I'm saying? It's exciting in that sense. I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm not saying that this is the formation they'll play next year, but a huge part of what Arsenal need to do is move forward with changes to this formation that make them less predictable, which make them harder to play, which make them a team that you sort of go, oh, do we really have to play those guys? You know, who do we mark? Odegaard or Kai Havertz? Who do we mark? Rice or Zinchenko? How they've got numeric supremacy in that midfield, but then they've also got an option out there in White. You can put Zinchenko out there, and Rice is very capable of filling and putting shadows on the field. He's also then very capable of distributing around to someone like a Zinchenko out there, slipping the ball through to Havertz, who comes a little bit deeper, similar for... There are so many options here. Gabriel Jesus coming a little bit deeper. These are all people who could play directly off Rice. That's not a triangle. That's not a diamond that I'm making there, by the way. And then Saka becomes a little bit further forward. Martinelli becomes a little bit... You basically got two people who stretch it. There are shapes here that I'm making that get me excited. And Rice at the base of that midfield is basically someone who can slot back in there because he's done that for West Ham, and also someone who can slot forward. These are all great opportunities, combinations. That's 4 central midfielders or 3 central midfielders, or really a second striker. Or could you have a second striker like that behind Jesus? You've got people. So what's interesting about Arsenal last year, right? They had a lot of people who arrived on the edge of the box. You had a lot of kind of class, and I mean class goals, when Jesus was out of the team. It was Martinelli coming in, cutting back to someone like Odegaard. Imagine if you could cut back to Odegaard, Partey, and insert other name here, right? In fact, it was Saka as well that he was cutting back to as well. I think Saka scored a goal from exactly this position. So I'm just looking at different combinations, where the goals come from. They need to be unpredictable. Having 2 players, Zinchenko, by the way, would suit playing alongside Rice so well. The combination of those two, passing-wise, it's someone else who he's not a mirror of what Souček did, but you get what I'm saying. There's so many different options and combinations in there, right? The only issue would be you might have a bit too much power over here. You might not be powerful enough on this side, but you possibly could be. You get what I'm saying? There's the possibility that Rice would have just to push over a little bit further that way, because he's quite this side dominant at the moment. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. I'm not saying he's a flawless midfielder. I just think what he does offer is when you are pushing forward and you've got your kind of 7 and 3, really 6 and 4, because you will have someone a bit more basey, it becomes a bit easier for you not to be susceptible on the counter-attack. Not only that, but if you're deep and you want to break, some of the time like Arsenal have done, gives you that option as well. I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments below. Have I missed anyone out? Do you think there's a transfer which will also change things alongside of Declan Rice? Could a Caicedo play there alongside Rice and allow him to go a little bit further forward, give him a bit more control? He's got the most passes into the final third at West Ham, but really high amounts of passes into the final third there. He's got the most interceptions in that area of the midfield for West Ham, but also really high up in terms of scoring there. And he's also a player that's really good at carries as well. So at the moment, you don't see Xhaka or Partey carrying a lot for Arsenal. Rice would carry forward a lot more. It would allow you a lot more flexibility in terms of who's got the ball. Maybe there's a few more combinations of Odegaard. Odegaard can push a little bit further forward. You get what I'm saying? It's these combinations and these passes into the final third that Rice would allow them to do. There is the defensive aspect, then there's the attacking aspect. And it's that transition that sometimes Arsenal struggled with, and I remember watching that in person a couple of times last year. And we've not even gotten on to the personality aspects of Rice at this point. Like, Rice is one of those players that seems really well liked in the dressing room. Arsenal are not hemorrhaging leaders, but they're having a few of them leave this summer. If you lose someone like Xhaka, he's a huge figure in the dressing room, really well liked. You want other people who are going to come in and rejuvenate that. You want people who are going to come along and bolster what it is that you already have. That's really key for them as well. You also want someone who's going to be marketable. Declan Rice is incredibly that. You also want someone who's going to be big on the international stage. Declan Rice is going to be incredibly that. And you also want someone who's not missed many games for West Ham more recently. Now, he's not missed many games. He did come on as a sub a lot towards the end of last season. I think they were trying to stagger some of his games, those kind of things. He's only really, I think he's missed like one game due to illness in his time at West Ham. Caicedo is also a player who appeared fairly regularly. I don't like going on kind of, when he appeared, when he didn't. He's basically a player you can rely on. And I think that's really key as well. I also think, obviously, having played in the Premier League, having that is massive. He's got relationships and knowledge of the league already. It's not going to take him long to acclimatise. He's going to be used to the pace of the game and those kind of things. And at the same time, it's going to allow him to build on the knowledge that he already has of the league and the players who are going to be around him. I think that's really key in terms of relationship building, bringing the side forward, but also having someone in there that is... he feels Arsenal, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not saying he's a typical Arsenal player, but he feels like a bit old school London. He is a bit more quintessentially English in terms of the way he plays. He looks almost a little bit like awkward sometimes. He's a bit more like, he almost looks like, the best way I can put it is like, he looks like he's sort of going, oh, yep, there we go. There is a fluidity to some other players that Declan Rice hasn't necessarily nailed yet. But I think it gives him a robustness, gives him a really good element of being able to turn the ball over from the opposition and take it forward. And his relationships with other players are the key here. It's not about how he looks, it's about how he plays and how he makes other players look. And that is really key with Declan Rice and what he's going to bring in terms of holistic elements to this Arsenal side. It's really good to chat to you guys about it. I'm excited to see what Declan Rice does in an Arsenal shirt. I hope you guys are too. If you've got any comments, please leave them down below. I don't want to have an argument, but I do want to have a chat. It's really good to have you guys around. If you've not already hit subscribe, please hit it if you've stuck around to this point in the video, and I'll see you guys in a little while. Much love. Bye.